welcome to this week's Three Legs Four Wheels F1 podcast. It's Paul here with
Sean,
Chris,
Lee,
and we're joined by a special guest this week,
Craig Scarborough.
Welcome along, Craig. Thank you for coming back on. It's becoming a bit of a tradition, is this, the post-testing pre-season show? I think the fourth one you've done with us now.
Is it really?
Yeah.
I mean, yeah. This is for me. This is Christmas. This is absolutely the peak time of year for me to see all the new cars, see them testing, and all them first sort of big changes. So yeah, this really is great fun. And yeah, it's nice to be back here. Thank you very much.
Oh, thank you so much for joining us. First question we've got to ask is, what impressed you about the 2021 cars? It's another of those wide-ranging scattergun questions.
I think the surprising thing for me, bearing in mind, there have been some rule changes, and the teams have had quite a bit of time to dedicate to this before they were able to start to focus a little bit on the 2022 cars, is how little they've actually done to their cars. The thing that impressed me was that the lack of being impressed. And I know we're going to see a lot of developments, particularly around the sort of the floors and the diffusers, which is the key regulation changes this year. But no one's really come up with anything that I looked at and went, "Oh wow, I didn't expect that." So that was probably the first thought. I think the second thing is just how competitive it's starting to look a little this year. That midfield group, Red Bull have really made quite a leap. And we'll talk about Mercedes, but clearly, I mean, I think there's them not performing quite so well in the 3 days of testing does kind of just build up the optimism. However baseless that optimism may be, but I think just 3 days of testing really didn't give us an opportunity to really kind of get stuck in the way we would normally do, and there's obviously clearly the same for the teams.
Yeah, because I mean, in a normal season, would have had 6 days, so would have seen more and possibly more developments as the test went on. But of course, with the overall lack of changes for this season that FOM wanted to bring in, and of course the current COVID situation, that wasn't going to be possible. You mentioned the diffusers and the floors being the sort of key areas this season. There's been a lot of fuss about McLaren's diffuser and the fact that they may have found a loophole. Are they the new Brawn?
No, not at all. I mean, I've been biting my lip probably throughout the testing, certainly post-launch sort of period, is that this seems to be the only time that a lot of people ever actually look at the cars, and they will, like an excited child, see something different, point at it, and go, "Look!" And I think a lot of the things that everyone in the sort of the mainstream motorsport media have pointed at this week really isn't that secret, that innovative, or that exciting, and it makes me sound like a bit of a humbug. But the McLaren diffuser change, I mean, it's interesting, yes. Was it secret? Well, not really. And everyone is kind of writing, well, all the other teams are going to go back to the drawing board and look at this now. They must be really surprised. When you look at the regulations, and you think, okay, well, we can't do that. And I'll explain a bit about what that reg change is in a moment. You would go, okay, well, how can I get around that? How can I put some bodywork in the area that's been restricted? And what McLaren have come up with is pretty much a kind of a version 1-2 of what everybody would have done the first time they kind of started to look at the changes they had to make to the cars for the new regulations. So I don't think it's definitely not a kind of a Brawn double diffuser. It's just, one of those little things that they've found probably works with their setup, and people may adopt something similar, or McLaren may away go from it. Again, I don't think it is that kind of central to competitiveness this year.
So what is the new diffuser regulation?
So no, let me ask you a question.
Okay.
When it comes to diffusers, what was the regulation change this year? How do you understand it?
Do the strakes at the back have to be shorter by a certain amount of millimeters? I want to say 50 millimeters, or is it 50% shorter than they had to be? They were, sorry.
That is absolutely accurate in terms of answering my question, because that is how everybody has explained it. But the reality is the regulation change is way more complicated than that and actually doesn't even restrict the length of the strakes in the middle of the diffuser. So this is where a lot of this kind of odd reporting is coming in. A lot of people are kind of, churning out the sort of the same misunderstandings without ever actually reading the regs or understanding them, which makes it sound like a councillor meeting.
So it's like that's the headline, and people aren't reading the article.
Read the standing orders and understand them. Yes, it is very much that situation. So what it is the as you know, underneath the floor of an F1 car, you've kind of got this stepped bottom. And the bit that hangs down the bottom, the middle step where the plank gets attached to, can be up to 50 centimeters wide. And that carries on into the diffuser. And the middle of the diffuser, therefore, in the middle 50 centimeters of it, can actually have the fences sit much lower, all the way down to the bottom of the car, which is that 50 millimeters, that 5 centimeters. And when the FAA wanted to kind of knock the downforce off the cars a bit this year, they thought, well, let's limit what they can do in the middle of the diffuser, because that's one of the hardest bits to get working, because obviously you've got that sort of what I call the boat tail, where the stepped bottom and all of the shape of the back of the car has to kind of streamline off inside the diffuser. So what they've said is that bottom 50 millimeters now has to be one continuous surface if you cut through it on a horizontal plane, which immediately I've probably lost everybody that's listening to this podcast. So what it basically means is when the diffuser starts underneath the car, any bodywork has to kind of flow off of that, and then can't have any breaks or serrations or slots or anything put into it. So what McLaren have basically done is carried on that line at the side of the diffuser and then just brought these up. And that fits in with the regulation. And again, when you read the regulations, you can think, well, that's the first thing you would do. You would try and just extend the start of the diffuser all the way back towards it and then think, well, hold on, that's actually blocking the airflow, so we'll just cut them off into this sort of shape. And before you know it, you come up with McLaren's solution quite quickly. So I would expect that most of the other teams, as I say, have probably looked at this very early and decided, do you know what we would rather do is ignore that area and put our normal fences as close to it as we can get to, with all of our clever sort of slots and serrations and cutouts and what have you, and get it to work that way. And that's what, 9 cars on the grid have achieved. And McLaren have just got something ever so slightly different. And it swings and roundabouts. The McLaren solution does have some benefits. You can see how it would work in terms of changing the pressure in the diffuser from the middle section to the outer sections, and how it can help airflow move into that center section. But equally, it kind of blocks that airflow at the same time. So, yeah, I don't think it is as exciting and as surprising for other teams as most journalists would have you believe. But of course, that doesn't get clicks, does it? So yeah, we'll leave it to the headline writers.
Right, I'll stop tweeting about it then.
What is it though that would make 9 teams look at those regs and see that option is available to them and go, actually no, and then for just one of the 10 teams to go, actually we'll give that a go? Why is there that difference of opinion?
Every team will have over the years built up an understanding of how they want the airflow to work around the car. That was what you would describe as their philosophy. And when you get regulation changes, what that you will find is that when they see what they can have to do to recover from that reg change and what opportunities that reg change gives them, they'll follow that philosophy through. So for some reason, McLaren wanted to work that middle part of the diffuser much harder, and therefore this sort of fence setup that they've got will work for them. Other teams find that the slightly wider spaced fences, and this particularly with the little sort of slotted bottoms that all these fences tend to have, will find that, well, that really gives us the performance that we want. We'll just stick with that. And, it's like that. It's, when you get a variation in regulations, there's always someone that will favour something. When high noses came in, some teams still found performance with a low nose car. every other reg change you could ever think of. Slowly, everyone then, sort of converges onto one solution. And I think what will happen this year, because of the oddness of these kind of 1-year rules, the restrictions of wind tunnel testing, and the demand to focus on 2022 as early as possible, I don't think many people are going to vary massively, and converge into one or other solution. So, I think this could actually be quite unique to McLaren for the year. I'd be surprised if anyone goes too far down the road of changing their diffuser philosophy to follow it.
Well, I mean, we already know that Haas isn't going to do anything with the car this year, and I think the car that we've seen this weekend just gone is the car that we'll still be seeing at the end of the year with no changes in.
Yes, yeah. I mean, the Haas situation is the one of the most curious things I think I've seen in Formula One for many years. Even when you think back to sort of Super Aguri, resurrecting that old Arrow chassis, they really worked on it. And Haas have just sort of said, no. They've made a few small changes to it. They've modified the diffuser. They've put a cape under the nose and changed the wing pylons. A bit of work around the barge boards. I mean, that really isn't a lot of work over the winter. When you think that all the resources they had, because of the reg changes where they don't have to make a new chassis. In fact, they almost cannot make a new chassis without spending tokens, and all the other bits can either be the same or coming from Ferrari again. What have they done with their money and their resources over the winter? Because they couldn't start 2022 development until the start of this year. So it's odd, and it's rather sad really, because I think Haas have had a tough few years, and you would like to see them, kind of make some progress. But this attitude that they've had this year is unfathomable, really. You would hope that they would have some cash in the bank and some optimism to do some stuff, but they just haven't. So in theory, they could start the year ahead of Williams. I mean, if we accept that Williams were perhaps the slowest team last year, but Haas, really, they've got, no tokens, no upgrades. It's like there's no hope, is there? You'd have to hope that they're really going to pull something out of the bag for 2022, because, as we've spoken many times on the show, I think Gene Haas has, definitely got a finite limit to how much he wants to invest in Formula One without success.
Which is why I think this is all part of... He's not bothered spending any money because he knows that by the end of the year, the Mazepin family will have bought the team from him. Possibly.
I mean, it's a very risky approach, trying to sell, a lame duck to, albeit, an oligarch. But
unless they've already come to terms.
But again, equally, it's like if someone wants to buy a team, they must have ambition.
I just wonder. This has just come to me now. It can't be a Russian team until next year when the WADA ban finishes. So it stays as Haas this year. Then it becomes Uralchem or Uralkali or Mazepin racing under the Russian flag when the Russian flag's allowed in sport again.
Yeah, but again, why would you throw away a year of gathering data and development? Albeit the regs are changing, but still, it's you've got to you've got to keep trying. You can't have people just sort of sitting back for the year. And I don't think there's a lot of time to be gained by purely setup development through the year in a year like this when everyone else has made changes. I think obviously Haas will add lap time to the car by understanding it and getting it to work slightly better just by playing around with it. But in a year like this year, and with their performance last year, it kind of defies understanding, really. As you say, there could be some deeper long-term game plan in here, but it just doesn't. I think there'd be a very sad way for Haas to leave F1 if it was, we're going to quit this year, we're selling the team, but because we really just couldn't be bothered this year, why turn up?
Yeah, it's the reverse of what Honda have done with Red Bull's engine, isn't it?
Yeah, exactly. They're going out with a shout, aren't they? And it certainly seems to be working so far.
Somebody else want to say something?
Is there anything to gain for them, like to be working on 2022 cards now?
Well, I mean, let's face it, everyone's going to be devoting as much development time as they can to the 2022 car within the regulations and within the resources they've got. So, yes, you could say that, they have an opportunity to stop and really focus on the 2022 car. And certainly Haas have been hiring lots of aero people, as you can sort of see through the classified ads online for F1 staff. But, I don't think by completely throwing away this year, they would gain that much more for next year. I think what they need, there's two sides to it with aero development. You've got the big new ideas and let's work out what we need to get these new regulations working. So that's one part of it, but that will only bear fruit if you already know that your existing wind tunnel program and the developments that you're doing at the moment in that wind tunnel are reflected on circuit. So if you're not doing ongoing development in the wind tunnel, which going back out onto the car, which they won't be, that means that if anything goes askew in the wind tunnel in terms of correlation to real life, and obviously this is, the bane of every aerodynamicist's life is getting that correlation. If that goes off, then all the work that they have devoted to 2022 could go in the bin because there's something that they haven't noticed wrong in the numbers, and they could be misled. So, there is genuine reasons for running some form of development program on the current car just so that you can run it and prove that your figures are right.
Yeah, I mean, we see it quite a lot now, don't we? Where if something's going to go badly wrong for a Formula One team, it does tend to be aero correlation, doesn't it?
I mean, that is one of the fundamental things, isn't it? You can see Mercedes having some problems. Maybe that's related to that sort of thing. It tends to be an aero program as much as, you may have structural things or suspension aspects to it. Fundamentally, the car's getting its lap time from aero and from understanding how the tyres work. And, aero is something that can go off kilter very quickly without you noticing it, because of all these little tiny increments teams tend to bring. So yeah, it's absolutely fundamental that they've got that understanding of the wind tunnel and that confidence that it's accurate.
Yeah, I mean, aero and tyre issues, that looked definitely something like what Mercedes were struggling from all weekend. I've not seen a Mercedes performance like that in a testing session.
Oh, I don't know. I mean, I think we've seen this quite a few times actually from Mercedes. I mean, I think it was, I can't remember if it was last year or the year before. I haven't stopped to go back through my notes, but the first week of testing, they looked dreadful, and everyone was saying, low. Oh, it was last year, wasn't it? Yeah, everyone was saying, low rate cars, it's the end of the road for them. Oh, Mercedes are going to happen. And the second week, they, absolutely blitzed it. And then when we came to, wasn't Melbourne, was it? They just strode away from everyone exactly as they do every year. So I don't think you can jump the gun too quickly with a bad testing performance from Mercedes. I think we could try and unpick the various things that were going on there for them. Definitely. We're not quite sure where they've spent their tokens at the moment. So there was talk that they were running a new gearbox, and that's what failed. Now, have they spent their development tokens on the what they call the gear carrier, which is the carbon case at the back of the car that holds everything together, and then the gearbox, which is the cassette that then slots into that. And they haven't said, because if you remember during the launch when they were talking about their tokens, it was very much a kind of you'll see when we've spent our tokens, as though to say it was going to be something in your face. And certainly whatever they may have done around the back of the car doesn't smack of a big in-your-face development. So not quite sure what gearbox they're running. There was reliability problems with it, and they did go back to a slightly older spec, but whether that was very much from a 2021 spec to a 2020 spec, it's a bit less than clear. And I'm hearing different stories from different people about that.
It was the lack of running that got me for Mercedes. I know they pretty much missed the first day. But But then, even after the first day, when they started to get some laps on the board, they weren't putting in what the other teams were putting in.
No, they weren't, and this is quite unusual from Mercedes, who I've sort of testing most years. Sort of day one, stint one, they'll go out and do a 10-lap run. Everyone else has done an installation run, and Mercedes, stint simulations. I think they did lose a lot of time. I think they were certainly not pushing that car as hard as they could. You could tell that just from the onboards that they. Again, it's been suggested to me that this is again down to concerns around the gearbox. But equally, we know they had problems with the MG UK last year, which they say they've cured. Bahrain is a hot venue, so if you're going to have heat-rated problems or overheating issues, it's going to be there. And then we had this they lost a lot of track time from spins. Obviously taking them off into the gravel traps and equally, upsetting and wrecking sets of tyres. And, they said they're not quite sure where this instability comes from. It seems to be something in the aero that affects the rear end, which means it could be anything upstream on that car.
Sure, it reminded me of Williams's aero stalling that they had.
Well, yeah, and it probably is something exactly like this. And this really is when you can now start to decide whether you want to create a conspiracy theory or introduce other people's conspiracy theories.
I mean, show me the lizard people.
So, yeah, the car was designed by lizards this year. But, I mean, James Allison's keeping very quiet about it, but, well, he's one of them anyway. No,
he is very tall.
Yes, and you've never seen him eat, have you?
And I'm sure I saw him lick his eyelid once.
Exactly, but yeah, there's two schools of thought. One is that they have a serious problem with the car, and they weren't able to sort it out, and now they're in all sorts of trouble. There's another theory is that they didn't have a shakedown, so all of these issues really kind of hurt them at the beginning of testing. You've only got 3 days, and that's just the way it is. And then the other one is that they've got a filming day this week, and this then starts to the conspiracy theory starts to mount. Is that they haven't said what their tokens are. They're testing this week. They don't seem unduly worried. They seem very open that they've got a problem, and it's out there. We don't understand it. Have they got a big upgrade to the car coming onto it during that filming day, and that will be showing us where they've spent their tokens. That for me, actually, that theory holds lots of water because we know Mercedes will often bring a big upgrade, either late in testing or very early in the season, and we know that they tend to bring these upgrades and run them from day one with very little problem. So,
Stop it, Craig. You destroyed my dreams.
It's one of these things.
Now that was the conspiracy theory that I heard last night from someone. So you could be onto something there.
Well, again, we do, the fact of the matter is we just don't know, and none of us can sit here and say categorically, are they in trouble for the whole season? Are they just in problem during testing? Are they going to have a big upgrade? I think one thing we can be clear about is that no matter what the problem may be, and if it's not even part of some of those conspiracy theories, Mercedes have got the ability to fix that problem really rapidly. I wouldn't be massively concerned if you're a Mercedes fan, or indeed one of their drivers' fans, that this spells the end of their period of success, which is rather unfortunate because it means everybody else who wants to see a competitive season. Does that mean that another championship for Mercedes? I think we've got some hope and some optimism there that it could be a more competitive season at the front than that. But don't underestimate the power of Mercedes. They will fight back. And we look at the Diva car from a few years ago. It still won the championship hands down, despite being a difficult car. I think both those drivers would be in a position to cope with even a slightly difficult car to drive.
How much do the tyres come into this as well? Because the tyres weigh a little more than they did last.
Well, I think again the tyres are a key factor for everybody. So the cars this year I think are about 6 kilograms heavier, and of that about 2.5-3 kilograms, depending who you ask and when you ask them, comes from the tyres. And this is to make the tyres physically stronger to cope with the high cornering loads. Which obviously, if we think back to Hamilton finishing the Silverstone Grand Prix on 3 tyres, one kind of mushy mess on the front there. Pirelli have had to cope with the increase in performance from these, and that just adds weight. The downside is that the teams really didn't get much chance to test these at the end of last season. They've had very little chance to test them, obviously, this week. And when you change tyre construction, then you also change things like the spring rate, how the tyres flex, and how that affects the aerodynamics around the rear of the car in particular. So it could just be Mercedes dialing in the chassis to these tyres. And again, that is just the work of setup and a bit of diligence and a bit of understanding exactly what's going on. So there's lots of people to contend with. Mercedes seem to be hit by this probably most of all. And again, you can then start to go to the other conspiracy theories that it's the low rake cars, it's the high rake cars. At the beginning of the winter, everyone said that the high rake cars would struggle with these regulations. And, I didn't think that would be the case. I think it's much more 50-50 between the reg changes affecting high and low rake than it simply being a one-sided affair. But, it's just difficult for the teams with just so little testing and a new set of tyres thrown in there along with everything else.
I think it's interesting where Aston Martin are, though, because they're nowhere, or they seem to be nowhere anyway. And you talk about a car which was probably regardless of where they were in the championship, probably the third best car on the grid last year. And it just doesn't seem to have transferred over.
Yeah, I mean, again, it was very hard to judge them through testing, which, it does make life a little bit difficult when you look at the car and how it looked compared with last year's car. And for everyone that loves to shout about, oh, it's a Mercedes copy, it's a lot more independent than that. And it's very easy to kind of point fingers at a couple of little details, but the car looks like it should be better than it performed on track. Again, they had some problems which set them back very early. Again, gearbox, I seem to recall, if I'm correct.
But they've took Mercedes
it was,
new gearbox, haven't they?
Yeah, and it's very hard to judge. I've never thought that the Force India Racing Point team have ever been a team that have come out particularly strongly out of the blocks in any season, to be honest. And they're always a team that tend to, come along through the year with, subtle development, with good race strategy and setup. And I think, that is very much the way they operate. And I think as much as it's, the name over the door has changed and you get this Stroll who's now looking like a Vijay Mallya, which is rather worrying. Quite what was going on there during the launch. And then again, you've got, Vettel's trying to settle himself in. Stroll, again, is a difficult driver to kind of judge and to predict where he's at. So, I think we just have to say that the jury's out on Aston Martin. I was kind of hoping that, the big injection of cash would, see itself into, an obvious step change in their performance. And we haven't seen that yet. And again, people I've been chatting to in the industry and, potentially within the walls of the Silverstone factory, although I can't name names, will sort of say, well, there hasn't been that massive step change in investment. They're starting to redevelop the factory now. And if you think that is very much the old Jordan factory and is really needed to have been expanded and developed for many years. So I don't think we're necessarily seeing the fruits of the Aston Martin investment just yet. And hopefully they'll leave it down to most of the existing engineering and race team to get the results for them this year. But it's a tricky one to predict, I would say, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
I
definitely.
was surprised to see them so far down. You know, I mean, they were last, weren't they? They were last and second to last.
Well, I mean, Sunday they barely got any running just because the car was in the garage with the floor off and the barriers in front of it more than it wasn't.
Yeah, which was good because we did get some photos of the engine. There's always a silver lining. We know what's causing the piston now.
It did give Vettel a chance to use like probably his greatest skill at the moment, which is making the best of a bad situation in interviews.
I must have missed that one. Ted Kravitz approaching him with some cheese, which
Yeah.
I have not listened to the full transcript, but I was just wondering what the hell's going on there.
It was a bit Alan Partridge, I've got to be honest.
Yeah, that was the feeling, yes.
Seeing as we've done two of the Mercedes powered teams, we might as well stay on that subject with McLaren next. The second debut of the McLaren Mercedes.
Yeah, they're back, aren't they? It's I don't know if I was looking at a McLaren Mercedes today in one of my other jobs. I mean, they're looking very good, aren't they? I mean, I think they're building up to a bit of a crescendo, McLaren. You know, for quite a few years over the years that we've been talking, it's been very much like, God, when are they going to pull their finger out? And then last year, it's like, well, actually, that's quite good. And this year, well, I mean, it's hard to find any chinks in their armour at the moment. I mean, they've got the Mercedes power unit, which we know is fantastic, has been historically. They've got their own gearbox, which potentially is a good thing because there may be some question marks over the McLaren gearbox. And it means that they can have their own rear suspension set up and, you know, they understand it. The aero has been working increasingly well over the past couple of years. And then they've got this driver pairing. You know, are they going to be the third team this year? Are they, you know, even going to be challenging the Red Bulls and the Mercedes? I think that there is that potential there. I think we did see some of it through testing. Again, don't want to read too much into sort of lap times and everything, but you know, I mean, everything is just kind of looking good for them, isn't it? It certainly makes the season look a bit more interesting, and then makes that kind of midfield pack, who appear to be kind of following very much on sort of McLaren's coattails in terms of performance, is, you know, shaping up to be a really exciting year.
McLaren are my one where if you've got a scruffy fiver in your pocket, which you need to get rid of, I don't think it's a stupid bet to stick them on for Constructors' Champions. Because if you look at the other teams like Red Bull, let's say Perez doesn't perform and we have another Albon situation because he can't adapt to Max's car, and Mercedes are in a bit of bother, and then later on in the season, Hamilton's going to have all the contract negotiation questions and all that sort of stuff is going to bubble up. And if you've got two people, which I think in that car are going to be 2 point scoring machines, I don't think it's daft.
No, I mean, yeah, I think that would be, you know, I don't condone betting, but yeah, I mean, that would be a great bet, wouldn't it? Yeah, I mean, I would love to know what the odds on that would be, but yeah,
it's 66 to 1.
66. There you go. I mean, I think McLaren could be that team that are there to pick up the points, the podiums, wins, and as you say, potentially even a championship if you know, the top two favourites do fall by the wayside. They're certainly looking, you know, in the right position for that, and you know, there's fingers crossed they do, because I think, you know, they deserve the success that their hard work and diligence over these past few years has kind of put in, and yeah, and that driver pairing is pretty exciting. I mean, I think both from an on-track performance, but probably potentially also their social media feeds is going to produce some fantastic little memes and videos this year as well.
And it would be another complete kick in the trousers for Alonso, who comes back to F1 after walking away because he drove a bad McLaren when they have their best car in years.
To be fair, he did walk away a while ago. And then they did send him to Indy without a steering wheel.
Yeah, Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I think Alonso's return. I mean, again, it's these drivers, they've got such ambition and such drive. I just don't know if that is necessarily. I got to say, I didn't really pick up on Alonso's performances during testing. I mean, I was spent a lot more time looking at the still images than the lap times and the videos. But yeah, it's a big ask for him to come back and everything to kind of come together at Alpine together at once. I sense there could be some frustration there on all sides. So yeah, that could be a fairly fiery situation to look at this year, couldn't it?
Yeah, I mean,
What's your take? What's your take on the airbox? Or like, it's like they got two of them.
Well, I made a remark on Twitter as someone was saying, well, Mercedes are going to run the LEDs under the car, and I think that Alpine have got a subwoofer the car, and they're just going to sit there in the pit lane on Sunday nights, just thumping out with the lights flashing and everything.
You could be right. Maybe it's a speaker, so Alonso can give direct instructions to the pit lane of what they should be doing. I can't remember who it was. I can't remember if it was Crofty or Brundle during the commentary of the testing, where they were talking about whoever's going to be like team principal role, and one of them turned around and said, "Well, they need to be of strong character, otherwise Alonso's going to find himself as team principal if he isn't already."
Yeah, that was Martin Brundle said that. I heard that.
Yes, that does sound about right. But the airbox thing is quite interesting because we saw the Renault, Lotus, Alpine, whatever the Enstone team. They've always historically produced quite inaccurate launch renders and launch cars. So when the engine cover looked a lot bigger in the launch renders, it was like, they've run a very big engine cover now for 2 or 3 years, I think it has been now. And this is all part of a kind of what we call a centerline cooling concept, where you effectively make the roll hoop and the engine cover a third side pod to allow those side pods to be narrower, which has obvious aero benefits. And throughout this period, the engineers at Enstone have said, well, it looks like it's a big bulky airbox and engine cover, and that would upset the rear wing and create lots of drag, but we find that it just doesn't. And you have to accept that's what their wind tunnel figures are telling them. That's what they're basing it on. So when you see it suddenly get so much bigger this year, it is rather striking, isn't it? I mean, I actually saw a rear end shot of it today from a slightly odd angle, and it just looked massive. It just looks wrong, like everyone's taken that picture of the first Ligier with its huge airbox as a comparison.
Oh, the flying teapot.
The flying teapot, yes. I mean, theoretically, it all works. Their side pods are significantly narrower, particularly down at floor level, which with the floor regulation changes that you've got this year are, as just as important as ever. Other teams haven't followed that, and again, it's a bit of a philosophy thing. Whether they carry that on into 2022. I would probably doubt, because everything changes again. It's just a chance for a bit of a clean sheet. But it's just one of those big odd visual things. And even then, there's been lots of talk about what's underneath it. So we know that there's some kind of radiator under there, and that changed after the second day of testing. They went to a much smaller or lower engine cover. It still had the same width, which is confusing. And again, there's lots of rumours around Renault's power unit. Now, we know that there were pictures from Alonso's visit to Viry, their engine development area in Paris, and there was what looked like a split turbo engine on the dyno. Have they introduced that for this year? Did they try running it on one of those days of testing, or were they just trying to see how big a cooling package they needed, which doesn't sound right. These teams are very good at predicting this stuff. So it's a bit odd. And I mean, I'm keen to see exactly what is under there and, the layout of the engine and what they've done. But, again, a big visual thing. And, I'm not sure if Alpine have done enough this year to kind of really step up. We saw some good performances from them sort of during testing, didn't we? They
Yeah.
certainly weren't disappointing. But again, as always with the parent companies in Renault's investment into the team, and are they really pushing? And I think we have seen maybe more commitment and more adventurism from the team this year. I'm just hoping that is matched with competitiveness on the track.
Yeah, they don't seem to have made the same step forward that McLaren has, do they? So if they haven't made at least the same step forward, you'd think, well, they're going to be in the same position they were in, or if AlphaTauri hasn't usurped them, but McLaren might be just a bit further down the road from them than they were last year.
Well, exactly. I mean, they were still fighting chassis problems, aero problems last year, so they have to kind of overcome them as well as, you say, pick up that potential gap to McLaren. And you don't get that. You're not at the moment. You're not getting that warm, fuzzy feeling that they are in that position where they will be right on McLaren's tails. And as you say, it's going to be a complicated situation. You've got Alonso, who can be a fantastic race driver, can certainly put a qualifying lap together and a first lap together. Ocon, I'm while I'm no judge of drivers, I have to admit that I've not been hugely impressed by Ocon through his career, but people seem to kind of root for him in terms of his performance. So it doesn't feel like they've got the complete package to really kind of deliver in some respects this year. From a driver and a chassis perspective. So they could have a real fight on their hands, fighting off, as you say, the AlphaTauris, being kind of one of them, as well as they've got the potential to be beating Ferrari, because I think they're very much a team going backwards again. But but I suppose that all makes for a pretty exciting season for us, doesn't it?
AlphaTauri, because they looked ace, and Tsunoda put the second fastest time in, I think, didn't he, of the whole test? But they've historically been a team that's run light, haven't they? There's been a few years where we've thought, like Toro Rosso might have a good car, or last year AlphaTauri looked exceptionally good, and then all of a sudden they're back sort of mid pack again.
Yeah, and again, if you look at their performance last year, I think we had lots of optimism. Obviously, they got a race win. I mean, you can't argue with that. But on sheer performance, sheer pace, it was very hard to predict quite where they were. I don't think it was the fastest car outright, but it was a very I think was probably the key thing. It looked after its tyres, and the drivers with their performance and pace and overtaking and everything else kind of worked for them. Certainly, Noda's fastest laps were aided by an odd DRS strategy, which would have given him some advantage. Whether that accounts for it or not, but
I saw that. Was he opening his DRS in places where he shouldn't have been opening it, or before the activation point?
It wasn't. He wasn't using the race activation points. He was activating it as soon as he could out of corners. Again, I don't know what that would contribute to lap time, but certainly when you look at the Alpha Tauri chassis. When all the bits that they've got coming from Red Bull, when that you've got that Honda engine in there, which is looking quite impressive as a step from last year, being in the back of that car. There's lots in that package which are really shaping up to look like a very useful race car. And again, if they haven't inherited the instability from last year's Red Bull by taking the parts that they have, and certainly testing doesn't give you that feeling. I don't think you would have got Noda performing at that level if it was a car as unstable as last year's Red Bull. They are looking very strong. And you just hope that, you have to take their testing performance with a pinch of salt, as you say, because it's something historically they've always got played about with. But, again, there's lots to be quite optimistic about that package. And Gasly is maturing into a very good driver, as we saw last year. I don't know I don't tend to follow the racing in F2, so I don't really know where Noda's at. But he certainly looks fairly exciting from what we saw during testing. So, overall, could this be a year where they really are kind of, towards the front of the midfield rather than that kind of where they normally are kind of bouncing between good weekends, bad weekends, and just mediocre?
Does that to do with the Honda engine, do you think?
I think the Honda engine certainly is helping. They've done a lot of work over the winter in developing that engine. I think they realise that their time's coming to an end. This year will be the last year that it's badged as a Honda, and I think they want some recognition for that. And we all know what Honda can be like when they really put the effort in a properly directed fashion. And they've done that in the past, and they appear to be doing that now. And I think certainly the Red Bull relationship with Honda really has improved and shaped that power unit in a way that it never did under the McLaren management. And then when they hand that power unit, or certainly the 2022 power unit, over to Red Bull and their new engine development sort of business, it looks good for them. It looks like they have kind of closed that gap back to Mercedes, and that's quite a tantalising prospect, because as much as I don't think Red Bull have necessarily had the best chassis in F1 for quite a few years, they certainly have been hampered by the power unit. So I think it's time that the talking stops from Red Bull, and they've got an engine there where it will expose their chassis for however it's working.
I have often wondered that about Red Bull and the Adrian Newey tie-up, where it happens to everyone, doesn't it? Regardless of what you do, whether you're involved in the technical side or you're a driver, there comes a point where I don't know if run out of ideas is the right thing, or you just get overtaken by other people around you. I think James Allison is clearly one of a future Adrian Newey type person, and it just makes you wonder whether, with, like you say, with Red Bull not having the best chassis for a couple of years, will this, like the new regulations? We're so used to an Adrian Newey car on change of regulations coming out and being something special, and it just makes you wonder whether if he doesn't do it, where does Red Bull go from there if they've relied on him so much so far?
Yeah, I mean, I think you make a good point, and it's a very much a valid point. Every designer kind of comes to the end of their career, for whatever reason, as you say, whether they run out of ideas or they just don't change with the times. I think one of the issues with the Newey Red Bull setup is that Newey, I think, is someone that is very much lays the car out and looks for that sort of big idea that, if not necessarily innovation, certainly a reinvention of some other idea that will work. And historically, that is what has kind of kept Red Bulls by being, a slightly different design, and has kept them ahead of the pack when they have been competitive. And I think as the regulations have changed over recent years, I don't think we've seen that kind of big idea, that big layout change, that big reinvention that Newey likes to bring to the car evident. And that then starts to expose the weaknesses in that, we have a guy that draws the car, then everyone else then go and does the kind of the minions do the detail work. And that sounds very like I'm denigrating the engineers at Red Bull, and please don't believe that's what I'm saying. But the way that the workflow works there is... I heard you
call them Oompa-Loompas.
But I think, and again, clearly it's a bit more three-dimensional than the way I lay it out there. But I think that is a bit restrictive, and I think it does need to be, maybe they do need to move towards the more modern, way that you have just a massive team of aero people working in a very flat structure, in lots of places, because now these cars are becoming so complicated with the aero that it needs lots of ideas in lots of areas to really, get all of the performance out of the car, rather than trying to rely on a kind of a key thing that, you can point to.
Is that
And I
quite
think, again,
common
that you
across the grid, though? Do other teams go about it that way?
there is not another team that I know of where you would have someone that really does kind of set the car out. Again, I'm using very broad terms here and simplifying things, by themselves, and then it then goes out to the rest of the aero people and the design office. Everywhere else, it is very much a broad setup where everyone is involved, and the technical directors and the senior management, then they're not even drawing. They're not even necessarily coming up with ideas or directions. They are getting all the other people, the Oompa-Loompas, as you described, which is another one of Formula One secrets. That's where all the ideas come from. It's all those little sub-aero groups that will work on, an aspect of the barge boards or an aspect, and cars get quicker, not necessarily from big ideas, but from dozens, if not hundreds, of little ones. And I think maybe Red Bull may certainly in fans' eyes over rely on the kind of the Newey effect, and the way that the regulations, and Newey's been quite vocal, and he's frustrated with the way the regulations are. And I don't imagine 2022 is making him any happier either with the way the regulations are worded for that either. But I think there is a bit of a change, and I think there has been a change. Obviously, I think now that the named technical director at Red Bull is Pierre, isn't it? It's not Adrian has got some even more senior title, but I think that does that. I think that will change naturally as Newey really does step back from that role. And I think every year, I think he probably tries to do it, but finds it hard to drag himself away, I imagine.
One thing I did notice about the Red Bull over the weekend was that it just seemed to me that had the highest rake of all 10 cars. I mean, it looked like it was going downhill when it was going uphill.
Yeah, that's a strange thing with the Red Bull in particular. You can stand behind it in the pit lane, you can see underneath the car, and it really messes with your head. And it's like, no, that's not how perspective works. How can I see underneath of a car? You've got to be very careful when you look at rake, particularly when the car's at a standstill. I know there were quite a few pictures. I think there was some of their, was it Hamilton looking behind it or someone? And the car was, literally, almost like it was a foot off the ground. But equally,
if you under load, is that the thing?
If you then looked at that car at the end of the straight, it would actually look like it's pointing nose upwards. And it's all the way that the suspension and what they call the collapsible heave damper works on these F1 cars, that everything just, all the rake just disappears at a certain speed. I mean, they certainly are, remain the people with a higher static rake, and certainly at sort of, low to medium speeds keep the most rake on board. And I mean, it works for them. That car was looking really good. It seems to have lost the rear end imbalance that it had last year, which again, everyone blamed on high rake, and said, oh no, they have to change their philosophy, just like they said with Mercedes at the beginning of last year. And the rear end of that car seems to be working despite the rake, and I think we can be sure of that because Checo was so comfortable in that car during testing as well, which obviously is a great pity for Albon, which had his year with the a bit of a diva, and Checo goes into a car that is much more benign and probably suits his driving much more than the 2020 car would have.
I can't help think they should have stuck with Albon. Now thinking about it and looking at this car this year.
I mean, again,
Lee, you were the biggest critic of Alex.
No, I know.
You should have. I wish you all could have seen my eyebrows during that comment.
No.
They must have hit the ceiling, Sean.
I'm sat next to you and I couldn't see your eyebrows.
It's only because I was thinking about it while I was watching testing, and I thought I was thinking about how good Albon was in his first year when he went from Toro Rosso to Red Bull, and and then you thought, well, what are they going to do next year now? Are they going to keep is Perez in for the long haul? I can't see them taking Gasly back because it's not really the way Red Bull works. They've got nobody else. I can't see Tsunoda going up into Red Bull immediately. It just the interim Perez makes less sense to me now that they seem to have built a more drivable car.
I'm gonna have to go back through. I'm gonna have to go back through the archives and do Lee's greatest hits on Albon.
Hey, I always said I wanted him to do well. He just wasn't doing.
I've completely lost my thread now. Shall we talk about Williams instead then?
Oh, I forgot about Williams when we were doing all the Mercedes cars.
Yes, we kind of skipped over.
Sorry, just
Williams.
quickly, in case people don't know, the before we move on from anything Red Bully, I think Tsunoda is going to be ace. I think he's going to be really good.
I like
Tsunoda. He looks really good, and he started racing in 2017.
Yeah, he was Japanese F4 champion 2 years ago.
Yeah, to put this in perspective, I have a 3.5-year-old son.
Get him in the car. Get him in the car now.
But he's pretty good at speaking now. I can have basic conversations with him. But in the same space of time it took me to get a baby to walk and have a basic conversation with me, that guy's become a Formula One driver.
Seriously, soon as we're out of lockdown, in a car, he'll be there in a couple of years.
Come on, your house backs onto a kart track.
It does.
It does, yeah, it does.
So, do you want to talk about Williams then before we go on to Ferrari and
Yes.
Alfa? Because they're kind of connected, aren't they?
Have we lost Craig?
I'm just checking. Yes, I think we have. We're having one of our technical issues again. I'm going to hit pause. Right, we are now back. Think of it as one of these instant jump cuts. The joys of recording over Skype.
Always.
So yeah, we're going to talk about Williams, and that car does look a lot better than the last 2 years worth from what we've seen. I mean, again, okay, we've only got three days of viewing, but it looks a lot more stable, a lot more planted, and quite a bit quicker.
Yes, it's strange, isn't it? I mean, when you look at it on paper, Williams have only spent one token, which they spent through last year anyway. And again, looking at the car, it's clearly very much a B version. Probably not even quite a B. It's sort of an AA rather than a B version of last year's car. But again, it's a little bit like Haas. You can add time to a car simply by just working hard enough on it. And it seems to have paid off so far. And yeah, it did look good. The colour scheme, thank God, looks damn sight better than it did on the hacked renders that were.
Yeah, it does.
It seems a lot calmer. And yeah, so again, maybe Williams have got a bit of stability there, and have got something that they can start to build upon. When you've got the change in management that we're seeing there now, with Capito, who's obviously is a very good pair of hands at a very high level in a team that really does need someone filling that void from Frank and Claire and Patrick. Going onwards, so things do look slightly better. Again, you've got the last year of their own gearbox, which has helped them with track time. We know that the Merc engine is going to be good, and maybe things are starting to sort of pay off there. How much they can hold their own through the year against the rest of the midfield, I think, is going to be the challenge. How soon do Williams switch off? And focus on 2022, which would be quite early, I would imagine. I don't know if they've actually sort of said anything to that effect.
Yeah, they have said they're going to bring aero updates during the year, but as you say, you can only assume they're going to stop work on that car quite early on.
There's a limit to what they can do there. And And while I think Haas could be easy pickings for them by the looks of things, then are they going to sort of catch up to everyone else through the year? Possibly not, but certainly if they can have those races where they do come good and can be, we know that Russell can obviously put in some fantastic qualifying runs, and can we have some races where we can kind of enjoy Williams kind of looking like the business again?
I can't help think that maybe their car philosophy is banking on some like spectacular stuff from Russell when it comes to qualifying, because I think it was Perez that was saying when he was following the Williams, it was the hardest car to follow when he was behind because of the air coming off it. So I think maybe they might be thinking of sticking Russell in the top 10 and then holding the field up for the rest of the race.
In a kind of a Dick Dastardly wacky races. Yeah, he's got to grow a little moustache, isn't he? If he can. It was an interesting comment by Perez, and I was trying to work out if that was a good or a bad thing, because obviously, in some respects, as an aeronomicist, you want the air to be leaving the car as cleanly as possible, but equally, you want to use every ounce of the energy that's in the air passing through the car. So by the time it's gone past the tail light, the air is completely used. So if it hits another car, it's not going to work their aero. So it's an odd observation, and certainly depending on circuits, if Russell can get up there, he could be a bit of a stopper in the middle of the midfield, and whether that's good or bad, I don't know. It's probably good for getting results for Russell.
Good for Russell.
Yeah. So look, I think it's something that we'll have to keep an eye on. But I hope it's not a false dawn for the Williams team, because we always like to see them sort of performing as well as they can, and hopefully this is the start of the fight back for them.
I think it's more as well because we've already seen what George Russell could do when he was given a Mercedes for a race. And it makes it even worse watching him at the back of the grid when you think, well, what could this guy be like, the next Lewis or the next Fernando? And he's stuck at the back of the grid in a car, soaring away at the wheel, trying to keep it in a straight line.
Yeah, again, there's different ways. I mean, if you're a great driver and you go straight into some good teams, some people could see that that's good for you. Then there's that kind of character building philosophy, and I don't think driving a bad car and having to kind of pull out great laps in qualifying simply because that's the only way you're going to get a good result or get noticed. I think it's good for him honing his skills. It definitely is. I mean, as you say, he's made his mark. Yeah, I think he made his mark through the season, and I think his stand-in drive only cemented that in people's minds. Let's hope that this will be his last year in an uncompetitive car, whether that means he goes to, perhaps another Mercedes-powered team next year, who knows, or a reinvigorated Williams next year.
I think he's going to be able to put some good Saturdays in at least, because when you look at the work that he had to put in last year, to do what he was doing in the Williams, and when you saw onboards with him through testing, it just looks like it's so much easier car to drive.
Yes, yeah. I mean, I think they have certainly knocked out the all those edges that were on that car from last year, and I mean, I think from a career point of view, obviously, it's important that Russell keeps that momentum in the other teams and the media's eyes, that he is still the man on a Saturday and still kind of puts in as greater race performance as he possibly can, because we all know what it's like. I mean, it just takes someone else to come on board and be the next big Saturday driver, and Russell could be forgotten. I mean, I don't think that would be the case, because I think clearly Mercedes have got their eye on him, depending on what's happening with their contractual situations this year. But I mean, I think it will be interesting to see how his driving, his maturity, develops through the year.
Well, he's definitely always had the maturity. Just from seeing him going back to sort of F3 and F2 days, he's always had an old head on young shoulders.
Yes, yeah,
and he's shown it behind the wheel as well. And that's only increasing these days.
Yeah,
and his head is probably about 3 times older than me.
Now, Paul.
All right, twice. Is that better? Right, I guess we're going to have to move on to the absolute shit show that's been Ferrari and how they're recovering.
Yeah.
First thing I want to talk to you about on this, Craig, is the rather cryptic statement that Mika Salo came out with about 2 or 3 weeks ago about they should do better this year now that they're allowed to put all the fuel in the car that other teams can. Was he just stirring up trouble?
There's 2 ways you can take his comments. I think the words or the words to the effect that he said was last year, 2020, they couldn't burn as much fuel as they used to, or something like that. And that can be read as 2 ways. One is that they were, I think the way everyone's read it is that they were given some kind of unwritten penalty where they had less fuel flow to race with through 2020. And then there's the other way of putting it is that actually they had the same amount during 2020, but previously, because of whatever they may or may not have been doing, allegedly with the fuel flow meters, meant that previously they were able to flow more fuel. Therefore, in 2020, they had less fuel. I think it's a relative concept. I think it's the latter rather than they were given some kind of fuel flow penalty. And with a difficult year, it was hard for them to recover their power unit performance without a big change. Now, obviously, there's been lots of stuff written, particularly in the Italian press, about what they've done over the winter, none of which makes technical sense when you read it out loud.
Sounds plausible for Ferrari then.
Yeah, it's they're using technical terms which no one understands, or saying things that they would be doing which every team would be doing anyway, as though they would never have thought of improving, the airflow through the inlet valve. I mean, it's like no one's done that ever before in Formula One, but Ferrari have done loads of it this year. Yeah, I mean, I think certainly their power unit seems to be an improvement, and that is coming very much more from comments from particularly Alfa Romeo, Sauber, and Haas, that the engine is improved. Obviously, the Ferrari drivers are going to say, and Ferrari themselves are going to say, the engine's improved. It simply, it had to, because it was quite down on power last year. People are talking, lots of people are quoting figures. Through the winter, it was 20 horsepower. I saw someone quoted in the Italian press saying it's 40 horsepower now. And again, I think all of these predictions tend to be quite wide of the mark. There's a much smaller gap between the engines than that kind of level of horsepower. But yeah, power unit improvement, let's hope so. Chassis performance, well, to be honest, when they unveiled the car, apart from what I thought was actually a rather cool looking nose on the Ferrari, which, although it was kind of cool looking, still kind of confused me from an aerodynamic perspective as why you would do that. But again, they've got the results of the wind tunnel, not us. But just looked like Ferrari hadn't done enough with that car over the winter. It's
looks very much the same shape-wise, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, you don't get a feeling that they're being aggressive. They, we knew, and they were very open about making changes to the rear end of the car, which is the gear carrier and the gearbox cassette. But in changing that, I can't see anything obvious at the back end that has changed as a result of that. I know that they did have some rear end instability in their car as well last year, which obviously what Sebastian really struggled with, and Leclerc has already said that has been rectified with this change. But, well, if they were changing all of those parts, why didn't they follow Mercedes and Red Bull with this reverse suspension setup, which is an aerodynamic gain? And they haven't. And it's like, well, what have Ferrari done? Have they just simply knocked off the edges off the old car and, reduced its drag, which was one of its key problems, that it didn't had too much aerodynamic drag for the amount of power that they have. So in theory now, if they've got a bit more power back, but they seem to be languishing in the speed traps.
Yeah.
They didn't seem to be setting any of the timing screens on fire. It was just a very kind of a mediocre car on a mediocre test. It is deeply concerning, because again, I think we need to have another team, with the potential of Ferrari pushing at the front of the grid. I think it's great for the image of Formula One having Ferrari doing well. So I'm a little bit confused. Are they holding back, or are they going through another one of these spells, as so often been the case in Ferrari? They just somehow just go into the doldrums for a few years where they're not even challenging for podiums. So I think we're just going to have to wait and see how it shakes out. But I don't have a great degree of optimism or hope around where their performance is this year.
Are they going for 2022? Do you think they're mainly focusing on the regulation change rather than quick gains this year?
No, again, they couldn't start on that until January, so it means all of their development time last year, and knowing where they were last year, and let's face it, they didn't put much new on that car through the year last year. You would have thought they would have come out with something, a significant step onwards. This is Ferrari. You've got to remember the level of resources that they've got. When they want to throw stuff at something, there probably is only Mercedes at the moment that have really got those level of resources that really could just pull something out of the bag. And on the chassis side, I just don't believe they've done so. So again, it's kind of baffling, and I hope they're not going to be relying on the two drivers to be the sole improvement this year, because I feel there could be quite a bit of needle between these two drivers for all the talk that they're saying. Oh, this is going to be so much better than last year. I feel that Leclerc is a little bit rattled by the amount that everyone's kind of gushing about Carlos going to the team, and in a mediocre car with let's be honest, two very good drivers, could be getting an equal amount out of it and could end up being on the same part of the racetrack through qualifying, on the grid, and through the race, and it could, really could kind of compromise their constructors' championship points if they are kind of getting underneath each other's feet and not getting on as well as they should do.
I think there's going to be trouble at Ferrari because, although a very good Formula One driver, I think Leclerc is overrated, and I think Carlos has the potential to do what Daniel Ricciardo did to Vettel at Red Bull to him, because this is the thing that always gets me about the praise that's lauded on Charles Leclerc, is that Charles Leclerc was just a little bit better than Sebastian Vettel when Sebastian Vettel had been ruined. It's not like he beat the Sebastian Vettel from like the multiple world champion winner when he was at Red Bull. He was just a bit better than him when he was already broken. And so I've never really understood the lauding over Leclerc.
No, I mean, I think that's a fair point, and I think people could level similar criticisms to Carlos as well. I mean, I think they are both, potential number one drivers. Are they the next big thing? Yeah, again, I'm not the best judge of that, but I think they're as equal as probably any other pairing on the grid, and from what I know of inside the Ferrari camp. There is a bit of discord there. So I think that could be interesting. And Ferrari really failed to Binotto certainly failed to kind of get a control of that situation last year, and it doesn't really bode very well for this year either. Then does it?
I mean,
No, I wouldn't have thought so.
Binotto really struggled to get a handle on anything last year, really.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a rumor suddenly over the winter that he'd been sacked, and it felt like it was no surprise. It was obviously a false rumor, or something that was misquoted from someone. But yeah, it's interesting. He at one point he looked like the right man for the job, and then suddenly is now looking that maybe Ferrari obviously is a bit of a pressure cooker of a team, and it may be great to be in charge of it when things are going relatively well, but it's a horrible place to be and trying to manage things when things aren't going well. So maybe he's one of those people that's good on a good day, but bad on a bad day, unfortunately. So and I've got a bit of a soft spot for him. I can see the good work that he has done, but equally you have to be critical of how the team have performed over the past couple of years and the direction it's taken and how it's managed, particularly drivers.
Well, you got to look at when Ferrari, the last time they were sort of successful in the Schumacher era, and you had a team of people there that were pushing Ferrari one direction. It never landed on the shoulders of one man, and that seems to, as soon as that was broken up and like Jean Todt and Ross Brawn had gone, they never seemed to try and follow that philosophy of having the right people in the right positions in the team, and it fell on one person. That seems odd. Maybe you need a Binotto and a who's the guy? Who was the guy that took over? He was in during the I think Stefano Domenicali. Maybe you need like Binotto and Domenicali in the team. Is that sort of situation?
Yeah, I mean, I think you do need a strong person leading the team, and I think everyone needs to have very clearly defined roles. And I think the problem with Binotto being a technical person going into the team principal role, and obviously the mix of technical people behind him, which has been a bit of a rotating sort of revolving door of people that have gone to Sauber and come back, and now there's all of these people.
James Allison at Mercedes, from Ferrari.
Exactly, yeah. But if you're thinking of Simone Resta and who's the guy who was at the FIA is Mikis. There's a number of people there, and it just feels a little disjointed and a little bit everyone's. There doesn't feel that, as you say, that kind of united front that everyone's clearly defined in what they do and aren't going to muck about. And you just kind of feel that with the current management team, where if you think back to who was the team principal previously?
Arriva Benny.
Arriva Benny.
Arriva Benny.
Oh, the Arriva Benny Hill show, as everyone called it, because it was that much of a farce.
Well, it was.
He cared though.
He was a good man manager at a high level. And you then had the technical people. He didn't have a clue what was going on the technical side of the sport. He probably didn't know what was going on most race weekends. But when people need to be told, go and do what you were told to do, that's what he could do. And I think that's a little bit is what's been lacking. It often gets lacking in some teams under certain types of manager. And I think you could probably look at, maybe Whitmarsh at McLaren was one of those people. He's a nice guy, knows lots of what's going on, but somehow didn't get that focus and that drive out of the team. And I think that's where Ferrari are at the moment.
I think the standard Ferrari way of doing things is it is sort of more definition and shouting at people to get things done, and that seems to work.
What made me
sorry with people, yeah.
What made me think Ferrari were in trouble or are in trouble was Carlos all of a sudden popping just a good time in on the last session of testing. That to me screamed like Ferrari sending a car out with a thimble of fuel in it to get a good time on the board, so that it just sort of silences the Italian media just for a couple of weeks till they can try and work out what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to be, we can read lots into testing, and lots of people put way too much effort in trying to understand where the teams are at. But I think certainly those first sessions in a couple of weeks away now, at Bahrain for the race. Is when it's all going to kind of stop talking, and again, you don't get the feeling that Ferrari have got an answer for that first qualifying session.
Do you think Alfa Romeo might be quicker than the works Ferraris?
There were in some races last year.
I would, with all due respect to Ferrari, I would love that.
I think it's very possible.
There could be times where they could out-qualify them. I mean, certainly Alpha, they're so hard to judge that team. Every year I look at their new car, and I've done this with Saubers over many years, and you think, wow, that is such a clever car. It's so well thought out. They've got all these bits and pieces on it, but somehow it never translates to great performance. With a couple of very limited exceptions. And again, this year, it looks like a great car. I mean, the livery looks great on it as well. And, I think Kimi really is having his kind of Indian summer in his career where he's just getting on with his job and enjoying it. And it really tells, particularly in his race performances. I just don't think that they've got the depth there to really climb, higher than that third from the bottom position. Really, I think that's very much where they're cemented, and I don't see that changing, which is a shame.
It is.
And, I think that the writing's on the wall that Alfa Romeo will be withdrawing at the end of this year. And there's all sorts of talk that they could become the Renault second team rather than the Ferrari second team, which, with Frederic Vasseur kind of makes some sense. It doesn't kind of bode well for, with the direction they're taking this year and everything else. So I'd love to be optimistic for the Hinwil team, but I really don't think that beating Ferrari is on the cards for them this year, unless Ferrari really do go into complete meltdown, which of course is always possible, I guess.
I was going to say it's Ferrari never. Sorry.
Do you think they just turn back to Sauber next year then?
Again, the badging and that I don't know. It certainly won't be Alfa Romeo. From what I understand of the situation, it won't be Alfa Romeo next year, which means they've got to be going looking for a lot of money from somebody.
I didn't think it'd be Alfa Romeo when they didn't take Schumacher, because that seemed to be the place that Ferrari would have liked to have put Schumacher, was next to Raikkonen in an Alfa. And when they kept Giovinazzi, I thought there's something going on there.
Yeah, I mean, I think the strongest talk is that it's going to be a Renault Alpine B team. And it's quite interesting because then you're looking at every team seems to be looking at a bit of a B team setup at the moment. And who would be the Mercedes B team? Is it going to be Williams? And clearly, obviously, Mercedes are putting a lot of effort into Williams at the moment. I think maybe to keep their driver warm, but certainly, there's lots of stuff going on there. Or is it going to be Aston Martin? But equally, Aston Martin have got their own kind of independent views of how they want to do things. So, yeah, it's. I think there's going to be some swings and roundabouts in how teams lay themselves out, particularly with the resource restrictions, with the budget restrictions and the wind tunnel restrictions. It's going to be useful to be able to drop key staff into a junior team, to send some of your development to a junior team, and even driver development and stuff. So, yeah, I think maybe the makeup of F1 could be changing subtly over the next few years.
It's a strange one for Renault or Alpine. That big year, Renault always feels like they've got half a foot out the door of Formula One, but all of a sudden to then have a B team as well, it's just a strange situation.
Yeah, and again, I suppose it depends where the money's coming from. And I suppose you could say that they need a lot less money now with the budget restrictions. Although, as I see it, some of these budget restrictions are still way above what some of these midfield and lower grid teams spend anyway. but I guess they will get a slight bonus in extra wind tunnel time because of their championship positions. But then again, there's ways and means for marketing money to be found in odd ways, isn't there? I don't think we're going to suddenly see someone come in and put a big sticker on the side of the Sauber team and say we're now the God forbid, a Rich Energy Sauber team.
I was just going to say if it's somebody with a very big beard coming in and putting a sticker on, I'd like to know if the sticker was paid for.
He's coming back into Formula One. He told everyone it's fine.
Yeah. Sponsor this year and a co-team owner next year is the video told us.
I'll tell you what. I'll have one of what he's having if you could only find it in a bloody shop.
Someone sent me a picture the other day of a Rich Energy branded long distance lorry bombing it down a motorway. So naturally it was probably full of Red Bull, but it was a Rich Energy van.
I have a can within probably 5 feet of where I am. I'm keeping that because I know
in a glass case.
It's going to be like a Chateau Neuf de Pape. It's a 2018 Rich Energy. It's like, wow, that vintage. You never see that come up.
There was only 7 of those made.
I'll dust it off out of my wine cellar and bring it out on special occasions.
There's one which wasn't part of the 6-pack, which hasn't got not suitable sale as an individual item, and that'll be the collector's piece.
That'll be, yes. But yeah, I mean, I think Formula One's going in quite a nice direction in terms of how it's trying to manage some of the costs from an operational and an R&D perspective. So the marketing budget could from manufacturers and sub branding and stuff could see a team like Sauber being bankrolled as a B team. Quite how they would do that, again, that's not my strong point in Formula One, but there are ways and means. So and again, failing that, if Sauber were left just to be a self-funded team, then you would seriously fear for their competitiveness and their future. So let's hope something does get sorted out.
I mean, the last time they were a self-funded team, they tried to make the most of it by selling 3 seats.
Yes. And again, they're much like Force India are one of those teams that do very well. Normally, they do the best when they have the least money, almost to a point. Apart from one year where they literally couldn't even make wind tunnel parts, they were so poor. But other years when they've been able to be quite clever. Their wind tunnel team have come up with some quite clever ideas, which have very soon been copied. So, maybe 2022 could be another one of those kind of key years for them.
It'd be good to see whatever the Swiss team's called next year getting better results. I've always kind of liked them as the underdog back to when Frentzen was driving for them. So in the first couple of seasons.
Yeah, I mean, they were some classic years. I've been, with the wonders of cloud storage, being reminded of my photographs every day. And when you go back and look at some of those early Saubers with the metallic blue paintwork, and they just look fantastic.
Yeah.
And they were quite exciting and quite different cars as well. So
don't forget,
DNA is still there at Hinwil.
Yeah, it was Sauber as well. Don't forget that brought Mercedes into the modern era of Formula One.
And maybe they could be their B team. There you go.
Well, maybe. Unlikely at the moment, but you never know.
Sauber next year. There you are.
And Red Bull and Petronas. You got to feel that they are kind of always a bridesmaid.
Yeah, I mean, I think they're always just in the wrong place at the wrong time with the money, isn't it? I mean, they got the BMW money and it all just went pear-shaped immediately, didn't it? I mean, it just never really performed for them. Although, obviously, again, they did get that win, but it just didn't progress in the way that we would have expected. So, yeah, I think you're right. They're always going to be a bridesmaid.
I've just realised I can't imagine a Petronas Sauber without Johnny Herbert's helmet in it. That's it. Whenever when I think of that, I can just see Johnny Herbert's helmet in it as well.
See, because I can never, whenever I see a picture, I forget that he was a Sauber driver. It's like, oh God, don't remember that. So it's strange to stick in your mind.
I love Johnny Herbert when he was racing. He was wherever he was. There was always a bit of me like plumbing for it. He always seemed like such a happy a guy like all the time.
Yeah.
So that was our one and only testing session for this year, and it all gets going properly the weekend after next. Even after such an intense season last year, we're all excited for it now. You feeling the same, Craig?
I got to say, in lots of respects, as we went into the winter from the end of last year, I wasn't really that looking excited to this year. But certainly seeing the mix of testing performances, I'm certainly a bit more excited now than I was. And I think it will be, maybe for me, it won't be. I don't think it's going to be the most exciting technical year, although I will be interested to see some of the cars once the bodywork comes off, to see some of the stuff that's out there. But I think it could be a particularly good year for racing this year. I think there's quite an odd mix there. You've got the mix of new tyres, teams switching their development on and off, obviously trying to ramp up to make up for a poor start, or giving up if they've made a good start, or just giving up if they didn't even make a good start. So yeah, I mean, I think it could be a year that tells a story, in overall. I mean, how many races is it now? I've lost track. It keeps changing, but
23 at the moment.
23 at the moment, yeah. So over the next 18 races, I think it could be. I think it could be a vintage season, particularly if you ignore who may be the slam dunk for drivers and constructors championships.
Oh yeah, I still think it's going to be really interesting to see who comes second this year.
Yeah, absolutely, and how close someone could potentially get to winning.
Yeah. I don't think we'll know for definite until a few races in. I don't think it's gonna unfold quite so straightforward as last year, perhaps.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's gonna unfold with quite a slow burn, and thereafter, I mean, I think certainly the midfield, much like we saw last year, could change all the way down to the last race. As teams really kind of push to get that extra position for last year. But equally, with the regulation changes, you may actually want to be a bit lower this year to get more aero development time for next year. So again, it's so many variables. It could make for a fascinating year. Certainly well worth booking the compilation DVD now already, because I think that's going to be a fascinating watch.
I would like to know what's going to happen if, let's just say, for instance, that Mercedes are in a better position than we think they are, but them and Red Bull are going to fight for a championship to the end of the year. Do you think you might get a situation like we had in 2008, where McLaren and Ferrari fought all the way to the end of the season for the World Championship and then suffered, but probably till now, if you want to put it that way, where they'd put so much resources in that come 2009, they were on such a back foot all of a sudden. It's what do you do in this case with such a big rule change? Do you go for short term, like we have to win this championship, or do you risk losing a championship to make sure that you're in a good position for next year?
Well, I mean, I think that the obvious candidates for that would be obviously Mercedes and Red Bull fighting for the championship. I think of the two, Mercedes are going to be in a position to risk more to get this championship, because I think they've got the depth and the money to still put enough effort in for 2022. I think Red Bull, and I mean, it sounds ridiculous to say it, but I think they are slightly more resource restricted than the spending power that Mercedes have clearly had over these past handful of years.
Well, Red Bull have to be extra stretched as well now, considering as of next year they're going to be a full constructor, aren't they? It's their engine and car.
So I think Red Bull have got a lot more to lose by really going all out for this year's championship. So yeah, theoretically they could give up the fight a bit earlier in terms of car development. And then you've got the driver's mentality is kind of coming into the mix as well. I think you would be looking more at people like if McLaren are behind Alpine, for example, going into those last few races, which I would normally call the flyaway races, but I don't actually know what the final races of the year are now. Completely lost track of the calendar. Could someone like McLaren or Alpine really kind of, stick their hands in their pockets and add loads of resource to this year's car if the regulations allow it? I think that would be a much more difficult question for them to kind of have to struggle with. And I think that could be the more interesting thing, because they, as you say, they are two teams that potentially could make a step for 2022. And equally, the teams that are just going to throw their hands up dead early, Ferrari are looking, potentially like they could just throw the year away from what we're looking at the moment. And obviously, Haas and Williams will be quite close to the sort of decision as well.
I think Alpine will chuck it in early.
I think they would be the ones more likely to not devote effort to this year than McLaren, for example.
Depends what Alonso wants.
True.
Yeah, well, he might have to stick his hand in his pocket if that's the case.
Or sell a few more hats.
Yes. Again, I think this is one of the things that's going to make it a topsy-turvy year. I think what we see at the end of the first Bahrain race isn't going to be the competitive order and the natural order of things in 3 races' time, in 6 races' time, and definitely not in 23 races' time.
I think the other thing Red Bull might have, though, if they decide to pull the plug to concentrate on next year, and by doing that lose a world championship or lose a fight at least with Mercedes, they could lose Max Verstappen as well.
Yeah, no, I think absolutely. And again, I think it's there's a fine line for them to tread. I think the other thing is they just wind up Max and let him go and say, look, you want this championship, it's down to your driving, mate. And see what he can do. Because I think he's one of those drivers, you get just a very few that, really can make the difference to the car, and, I think that's one of the things that makes a true champion. Clearly Lewis has had that, Schumacher and Senna and, a handful of other drivers have had that over the years. I think that's something that Max has got. And if he wants to push and if he's that close, I think he can make a bit of a difference. And if you were looking at a competitive order at the end of the year, I think it's still hard to look past Sir LH for a championship. But second place, I wouldn't put Bottas as a slam dunk for second in the championship this year. Definitely not.
I said last week that I think this is Bottas's best chance to win a world championship. This is before testing, because we've always said a happy Lewis is a fast Lewis, and regardless of what happens, like as far as media wise right now, where if what we've been told is right, where he wanted a 3-year contract with Mercedes and they've given him a year, when you're as good as Lewis Hamilton, that's a blow to your ego. And I can't see that not becoming a niggle through the season, especially when it comes to contract times, unless 5 races in, he gets his 2-year extension and everything resumes as normal. I think Bottas has the opportunity to Rosberg Hamilton this year.
I think that could be one scenario. I think the biggest chance for Bottas, in my opinion, if the car doesn't start out great, Lewis, as you say, doesn't feel that love and his head dropped quite early. Now, we've never seen that before, but I could imagine it could happen. I think Jackie Stewart, he was actually lambasted for saying it. He said, at some point, championship winners burn out. And certainly Lewis has got lots and lots of drive. He's got lots and lots of ability. If he can go out at the start of the season, start winning races, I don't think he's going to care about his contract because he's going to say, look, I'm winning all these races. But if for whatever reason that the car is a bit niggly, then, as I say, he could, just not have that motivation there that maybe he's had in the past. Again, I've got no reason to suspect that. But then it would be up to Bottas to be able to cope with the car that maybe Lewis isn't able to cope with. And I don't think Bottas has got that in him.
No, that would be the issue. It would be a talent gap again then, wouldn't
it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think the only way that Bottas would win is if Lewis indescribably doesn't want to perform this year, which will probably be much more under maybe your circumstances.
Like a 2008 is what I was. No, sorry, not 2008. Like a 2011 season where his head dropped. He seemed to be constantly crashing into Massa for some strange reason. That's what I can see.
Yeah, I'm not sure if Bottas has got the maybe not in a Rosberg style way of doing it, because I just don't think Bottas is that type of thinking person. Not to say that he doesn't think or he's not clever or anything, but I think Rosberg had a very, very specific mentality that he knew he had to bring, and I don't think that's the sort of person Bottas is.
Actually, to go against my own point, I think Rosberg was better too.
Yeah. And then he's still got, he's got a hard charging Verstappen to cope with. Qualifying in those opening laps, overtaking in the race. I mean, Bottas probably last year was one of those drivers, particularly at the beginning of the year, seemed to be doing lots of overtaking, but only because he would overtake someone and then have to overtake them again because they came straight past him.
We're discounting Perez as well, actually, thinking of this.
I mean, he could be. He could be a dark.
And everyone else.
That would, I mean, I think the Perez Championship would have to be a really odd set of circumstances, but you could see how
it would be great though.
Happen. And maybe it would be deserved. If he did get the championship at the end of it by just getting those results in rather than what we can expect this year, which could be some fireworks.
Don't forget we're on. We're on Bottas 3.11 for work groups now. There's been that many different versions.
Yeah, we've tried the porridges, tried the coffee. I mean, we're running out of foodstuffs to bring performance gains.
I think we're at the point where it's like Bottas, like 0.5. He's done like a Windows and skipped a couple to make it sound better.
Just don't wait for Bottas Vista. It's going to be really disappointing.
Did it crash a lot?
Hey!
IT jokes at F1. There's very, very rarely but better things.
But no, right, Perez. I see no reason why, if he could do it, he can't beat Verstappen. Though, if he's got, let's just say the talent's there, we just haven't seen it yet because of the car he's been in.
I think I'm qualifying. I think that the qualifying will be massively offset because I don't think Checo can
one lap pace.
One lap paces. He could well end up getting past on strategy, and that will really depend on how Red Bull want to deal with him.
Yeah.
We've got a strategy that will get you in the lead. Will he be allowed to do that?
Probably not.
Yeah,
weather time, isn't it?
That could be really tricky. But I think that is, again, I sound like a broken record, but I think that's Checo's trump card. So maybe it will be a 2 horse race. Bottas and Checo fighting it out, and Max and Lewis fighting it out.
I think Ricciardo might be able to get himself in the mix somewhere.
And then, when they're busy looking at each other, you see Ricciardo flying up the inside on Norris, as we so often see. So, I mean, again, when you look at it, some of these opening laps this year, I think, could be sensational.
It's the stories as well. Like there's a couple of people. Like I think this is a massively important year for Norris because if he gets done by Ricciardo in his first year in McLaren, Lando becomes a good Formula One driver and not champion-elect. If he can do Ricciardo, he becomes one of the top guys, or if he matches Ricciardo, he doesn't even have to beat him. I don't think he just has to be like with him.
I know a lot of people that place him above Russell in potential. Again, I kind of ask these people these questions, and that's where they feel he potentially could be. But as you say, you've got a very confident Ricciardo who is, again, one of those kind of really top drivers. And again, when you look at his race performances in particular, and his ability to get past cars when you really have to, it makes him a hard guy to race against.
In another universe, he's in a different team, and he's won a world championship or two, or right by now.
I think that would be, in a non-Mercedes world, I think that's exactly where Ricciardo could be, and I think he realises that Ricciardo has to hit home this year that he's able to do that, because I think if he has a lackluster year, I think that could very rapidly, if not end Ricciardo's career, but I think it could limit the options he's got for wins in championships going forwards and the teams he gets to choose to drive for.
I hope he does well, but I want Lando to do well too. It's almost like they can't both do well.
The drivers, yeah, they can't. Not everyone can win all of the time.
Yeah, you get 3 winners per race in NASCAR. This is completely different. No, you do. They've broken the races down into 3 chunks now, and you get a winner for each stage.
I only follow professional motorsport. I don't know what NASCAR is.
You haven't played enough iRacing. No, it's gonna be an interesting season, and hopefully an interesting season of Drive to Survive next year when it comes out about it. Talking of which, that's out this weekend. The Friday, the 2020 version.
Now, who's going to be the first person to watch the whole thing? Post it on social media.
Well, it took me ages last time.
The media have already watched it.
I fast forward most of it, so yeah, I tend to be even quite quickly.
The media have already watched it, and some people are saying that they overly milk Romain Grosjean's crash in Bahrain, like really milk it, and also they show Ferrari in a much worse light than was probably actually happening at the time.
Yeah, I mean that sort of fit in with the general narrative that they use, isn't it? So yeah.
Well, it's TV. It's for drama, isn't it? That's what you got to remember. It's not necessarily exactly as it happened.
No, absolutely, and I think that it's not my cup of tea, and I'm a very particular type of F1 fan. But when you do go on to social media, particularly sort of Reddit and stuff like that, where you get lots of the younger or new fans, the amount of people that it has brought in as an interest to the sport is incredible. And it's like, well, isn't this what the TV company should have been doing anyway? Because there's nothing they're doing that all the other cameras around the race weekend.
They've just turned it into a reality TV show. That's all it is.
I think they've just stopped to chat to people and brought a story out rather than just talking about, well, who's going to be winning this race, with a dozen ex-F1 drivers stand in front of a camera for 2 hours for the race, just whittering on about what might happen in the race or then hours after, rather than pulling the real stories out of there. Because I think what comes across in Drive to Survive is once you get people away from the run-of-the-mill press conferences, there's some real characters out there, And
yeah.
I think the sign of being an absolute example, when you put them in a position where they can just talk, it's fantastic.
The beginning of last season, of Drive to Survive, I think sums up its success, and it's the lack of sanitization, and it's something that I don't think, for want of better words, I don't think legacy media gets, but they can't get it because of 100 complaint letters that would come in. But that opening scene where you've got Ricciardo walking down with his trainer, walking down at Monaco, and he says, "Oh, it's Netflix. Well, they're a bunch of cunts, aren't they?" And it's you can't have that anywhere else but someone like Netflix.
Yeah, I mean, certainly on that extreme, I think that they do somehow manage to extract a story from a weekend in the way that your average TV broadcaster doesn't do either during the race weekend or at some point up to the start of the next race. And they literally would only talk about on-track action and maybe chat to some drivers. It doesn't bring the stories out, and I think it's because it's so story-based. I think that is what's really lacking. And there's there are big stories, but equally there's lots of people. I think one of the things that's been fantastic from the Mercedes social media team is when they put their engineers on with these debriefs. Now, obviously, that really excites me because they talk technical stuff. But when you get someone like James Allison or the other James chatting about strategy and about things in a really clear and accessible way without kind of lecturing you and without making it too geeky, everyone goes, oh, actually, that's really interesting. I really like that. And these people aren't, boring backroom boys. And that starts to come across because, having been in the F1 paddock and spent lots of time chatting to people across the teams, you don't get people talking to you like they do in the press conferences. That's not, maybe Kimi Räikkönen, but only because he talks the same way all the time anyway. These people are, they are personalities. They have got interesting stories to say, and it just doesn't get picked up except for some reason by Netflix and the Mercedes-AMG social media team.
I think that's what Mark Priestley got in his book. Like it's still my favorite Formula One book, the Mechanic. I think what he wrote was great, and it's the human aspect that Formula One lacks humanity so often.
It does, and again, it's very much reflected by the way that the PR people and the TV people. It's just talking to drivers in press conferences, and that is possibly the worst way to get any of the story across. But no one seems to have kind of picked up on this, which is, a real shame.
It's just very bizarre you talk about a book with F1 humanity in there, which features Ron Dennis quite heavily.
Strange juxtaposition. When this kind of sees the narrative, I think that actually does kind of bring us on to the other talking point, sadly, from the weekend. There's someone that did bring that humanity into the broadcast.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, for those that don't know, Murray Walker sadly passed away at the age of 97 this weekend. And I think Damon Hill actually said it best, that we never thought we'd be in a world without Murray.
No, not at all.
No. And I think it's lovely in some respects that we never will, because we've got all of his broadcasts, all of those blooper videos that he did, the pizza advert, which I think is an absolute classic. Damon Hill, who would have thought them two could put a performance in like that? But yeah, I think as soon as he stopped commentating, I think we did actually lose something from the commentary, because no one really brought that level of excitement to a broadcast in the way that Murray did. And
it was all genuine though as well, wasn't it? Genuine excitement for his passion for the sport. It wasn't. Oh, this is an exciting part of the race. He loved it as much as anyone else. He was the biggest fan of the sport, and what you were doing, you were listening to the biggest fan of the sport tell you how much he loved what was going on, and that's what made him so special.
I get excited, and if you think of certainly those of us that only used to be able to watch the Grand Prix highlights back for me was through the 80s. That would be maybe on Sunday night, sometimes Monday, sometimes only on Monday evening, depending on the timing of the Grand Prix. You'd only get 30 minutes that would start with the start of the race and end with very rarely even the podium. And sometimes Murray wasn't even at the Grand Prix, just over in the UK to the highlights. But somehow, with nothing other than the dodgy timing screens that they would put up in the 80s, he conveyed a degree of excitement about that race that often really wasn't there, because there was lots of very boring races in the 80s, despite what lots of people may remember or may tell you. And it was fantastic. And I've as we all have, kind of reflected on the impact Murray had. And for me, I got into motor racing very much separate to the rest of my family. No one in my family was really big into motor racing or big into cars or anything like that. So I've sort of come to realise that Murray was that uncle of yours that was really keen on something that you could chat to. Obviously, sadly, I didn't get to chat to him until many years later, but he was the person that gave you that excitement and that interest in the sport. And I think for me, I've been lucky enough to make that into a career. For lots of other people, it's just been a lifelong fascination and fandom of the sport.
One of my strange. Oh, sorry, go on.
No, go on.
I'll say one of my strange but very unique Murray Walker memories was I think was the centenary of the Isle of Man TT when he came over here, and the local radio station let him do commentate on the parade lap, and they had notes ready to go. So he knew which bikes were which and what was coming out when. He didn't need them. These were bikes that he hadn't seen for 60 years because his dad would race on the Isle of Man TT, and him and his dad actually commentated, I think, up until sometime in the 60s when it was still a part of the GP calendar, and it was just like, oh, this is the the 1947 Norton, and he hadn't seen that bike since 1947. But he knew what it was, and he knew what races it had taken part in. It's like, oh, this bike's very dear to me. This is the Royal Enfield. So how do you know these things? Like, he never forgot anything. His passion was so deep that he remembered every little detail going back years. And I know that wasn't a world broadcast. That was only broadcast locally here on the Isle of Man, but anyone who listened to that at the time, and I don't know if it's available to listen to anywhere again now, but
it will
that
be.
It will be. That was really, really special because it was almost dumbfounded how much he knew and just didn't need the notes, just reeled it all off.
Well, he spent, he's like sort of lots of us kind of sort of mega keen fans. He really did kind of just soak up all the information. I spoke to a number of magazine editors, and they said that when they started a magazine up, he would often be someone they would contact and get an interview. And one of the magazines that I've written for, Race Car Engineering, which started up the very beginning of the 90s, if I remember, and they got a stand at one of the motivation shows, as you do, with their first issue, and the first person on their stand and their first subscription was Murray Walker. And I've heard the same story many, many times. He goes, yeah, I'll pay for a subscription to your magazine. It's like, whoa, hold on. He'd have probably got a free one. And frankly, most of the other commentators probably wouldn't have been interested in it anyway, but he really did. And if I could just kind of indulge momentarily, I only ever really properly met Murray once. I came across him in the paddock many times, but we were at the Benetton, or it may have been the Renault. That was a Renault launch, where they launched the car in Sicily in deference to their tobacco sponsor. So they did it in this big opera hall. Murray was on the plane out with all of us British journalists, which was fantastic. And it's the first time I'd been close to him. I had a friend who was a photographer that was with us, and he just sits and starts chatting to you as though he knows who you are. And he didn't. But he just chat and he was interested and it was fantastic. And we thought, this is great. He's an amazing guy. And then they ran the car through the streets of Palermo. And at the end of it, I can't remember which driver, it may have been Button, I think, actually, did some donuts in the car in the middle of this square. And then as he finished the burnout, the car stalled. And then all of the crowd, which was massive, as you could imagine, stormed down to the car, and we were kind of sat there, and there's like people running all around us, and me and my friend, as I said, were kind of getting a bit worried. He says, well, we better get back to the coach and because it felt like a riot was kicking off. It was a little bit scary, and then was walking back, it's like, oh shit, Murray's going to be in that crowd. How the hell is he going to get out? We walked up the stairs in the coach, sat in seat number 1 with a big smile on his face was Murray Walker, eating a sandwich. And it's like, oh, Murray, you okay? Were you involved in it? He goes, oh, no, I didn't go and watch the car. I've just been sat here all the time. He goes, well, what's been going on? And it's like, oh, my God, I thought we'd lost Murray Walker in a riot. And it's, he's one of these people that catches your eye and smiles, as I say, as though he knows you. And then will ask a question as though he's, knows exactly what you've been doing all your life. And it's just, always, whenever you see him, just brings a lovely warm feeling to you. And hopefully for every fan that's only ever heard him or seen him on broadcast gets that same feeling. So, sadly, it's a big loss from the world, but we can all go back and look at, as I say, all the old footage of him making all those fantastic bloopers.
Yeah.
I think it's rare that you get somebody that's in any sort of prominence that there's very little like bad things said. There's very little criticism. Like you say about the bloopers, you pull it up, but it's fun. It's no one was criticizing him for it and like calling for Murray Walker to be replaced. Whereas it's you get quite a lot of stuff thrown at like Martin Brundle or Crofty or other commentators. It didn't happen to Murray Walker.
I mean, I think his bloopers, they weren't mistakes. They were slips of the tongues and miscommunication of grammar. It wasn't that he said that, why is this car suddenly on such a slow lap up because he's in the pits, as you would often get with lots of the other commentators. It was him saying, the beak of Senna's car is ahead of Brundle's car, or whatever that classic thing was. It was like...
The car in front is completely unique apart from the one following it.
Again, and I know that there are posters of his comments which you can buy and stuff, and it's like, they're endearing. They're not mistakes. They're mannerisms. And I think
it was his excitement, though, wasn't it? It was his excitement that forced those errors. It wasn't out of boredom. It wasn't out of not knowing what he was talking about. It was the sheer adrenaline pumping through his veins that made him so excited he muddled his words up sometimes, and that's why it's so funny.
I mean, he always used to say that when he was excited, his mouth was 2 heartbeats ahead of his brain.
Yeah.
Damon Hill's tweet I found quite heartwarming. If you saw it, something along the lines of, "Tonight we all have lumps in our throats."
Yeah, now we've got to stop it because we've all got lumps in our throat. Yeah.
I think that one thing sums up his story through the sport. Obviously, over the years, and his enthusiasm and his clearly his love for Damon and his way of finding the right words. And I mean, I like all of us, I think we all choke up when we read that over the weekend. And what a fantastic epitaph for a career.
Absolutely.
I mean, he's one of the few people where we could have a tribute to on this show where all of us are laughing.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could literally just play back all of his playbacks, and no one would be critical, and everyone would, be smiling, have a tear in their eye.
Yeah, I'd love to do it, but FOM would probably have some words with us involving cease and or desist.
So it's okay. Bernie Eccleston wouldn't burn us anymore.
I'll give Stefano a ring. He's in charge now. I think there's been so much said about Murray Walker, and I think there will be for years to come. And I tweeted this out sort of on behalf of all of us on the podcast. And if it hadn't been for Murray Walker, there probably wouldn't have been a 3 legs 4 wheels.
No, there wouldn't have been. Not at all.
No, yeah. I mean, I think a lot of us owe our passion for the sport from his being nurtured by him with his commentary.
Yeah, definitely. Lee, have you got a Who's a Total Shunt for us this week? And Craig, do you want to join in with this one? Have you done this one before? The 10 clues. It could be about anything, and it has been technical items before.
No, I haven't done this one before. So yeah, go on, throw me in.
Right,
throw me under the bus.
Lee, have you got one to hand, or am I filling again?
I have. It's by Centerio Nasty, and I forgot we were going to do this.
These are always tricky.
Right, Santerio Nasty, just to give a bit of background, always comes up with these incredibly tough ones.
So Santerio
Right.
Nasty is Finnish. I think this is an important thing to start on.
So there's a chance it could be a rally driver.
Yes.
Yeah. Some slight Lee background for Scarbs. I'm dyslexic, and I really struggle with pronouncing names to the point where I can't actually read the name of this one.
I think that's always a nice part of it, though. It's part of a total shunt is having the person's name read incorrectly.
So he's definitely Finnish.
Probably not Keke Rosberg.
Right. Clue number 1. Oh, there's various rules. You have to do a guess after every 3 clues. You get 3 guesses. Pick one at the end. I was born in 1955.
1955.
Okay, so that makes him 66 this year.
I was European karting champion in 1975. Following that up with a European Formula Ford 1600 title in 1977.
So 20 when the one karting.
That's quite late for karting, isn't it?
Hmm.
Then
Well,
I,
it is now, but I don't think it was probably in the 70s.
Interesting.
Fair point.
then I had some success in Formula 3, Formula 2, but I never got a championship there. I would like a guess.
Oh,
Don't
Christ.
come at me once.
God, I'll bet you would.
So if we're looking at a Formula 1 driver potentially, is it going to be somebody that came into the sport early 80s? So we would be looking at somebody around the era of Keke Rosberg if we were going with someone Finnish, would we not?
I feel like I don't want to be lulled into the false sense of security of it definitely being a Finn, and I also think Lee would know how to say Keke Rosberg.
Yeah, I think so.
Are we definitely saying Finn, or was that Scandinavian?
It's been sent in by somebody from Finland.
Yes, Santeri has a habit of sending us difficult Finnish racing drivers, but I don't know that he specialises exclusively in Finnish drivers.
Right. Early 80s.
Stefan Johansson? No, it'd be too easy for Lee to say.
Wouldn't bet on it.
I preferred Sean's face.
I can't think of anything better, to be honest, if we're going down the Scandinavian/Nordic route.
Yeah, certainly someone that started, because obviously you had some Swedes in the late 80s. The late 70s. Like Nilsson or Borgard. But I think they're probably a bit too old.
Let's go with Stefan Johansson as the first guess.
Just as guess number 1 of 3.
Clue number 4. My first visit to F1 was in 1982, and it was filled with nothing but retirements and DNQs.
82.
All right, so it's somebody in a particularly crap car.
Mm-hmm.
Number 5, I had 71 entries, 64 starts, and retirement percentage of around 75%. I take it 70%. It says around 70.
Bloody
Wow,
That's
okay.
quite high.
That must be even higher than Julian Palmer. The most unlucky driver ever to step into Formula 1.
But then had to step out quickly to avoid the inevitable flames.
Yeah. I've had more success in IndyCar and kart and World Sports Car Championship.
I do seem to remember that Santeri once sent in Harry Lyondike, and you really struggled to get that one out. But I don't think you're doing a repeat.
I have a funny feeling that maybe I made fun of that surname. I'd like a guess.
Oh God, another one. Oh,
So what was
This
that?
is even more tricky because I've nailed a bottle of wine through this podcast.
Oh God.
I'm just going to briefly disappear because I need to rescue the SD card from the cat.
Right. So you said sports cars, IndyCar, and kart.
Yep.
Right. Okay. Ooh. Just trying to think of anyone that had been knocking on a bit when Mansell was in kart in
I think I
'93.
can say this name. I think I've worked it out.
Okay, so it's not Harry Lyondike then.
I'm trying to think who had the rubbish cars in '82, because that was at the start of the turbos. That would suggest that he had that many retirements, unless he was an Osella driver, and they never finished. Who drove Osella?
I don't know. I'm not very good at 80s F1 because I didn't start watching until 1991 is the first year I started watching.
I'm trying to think, because that was one of my first years I really kind of followed it. Osella was obviously a Paletti that died. I think he was teammate to Jarier by then. Neither of them really kind of fit in with the. No.
Yeah, 'cause I don't think Jarier went to the US, did he?
No. He was too old as well. But I can't think of anyone even slightly Finnish or Scandinavian that year. So
I'm looking down the clues here. If it's the one I'm thinking of, I'm thinking Scarves might be able to help us out with clue number 8. I'm thinking that's when. If it doesn't come for clue number 8, I think you've fucked.
I think we're gonna have to bin this guess off, aren't we?
I have nothing to offer.
Me neither.
No, I'm struggling with someone that debuted that year.
Clue number 7. I've had 3 pole positions in F1, but no wins.
Position.
Blimey.
3 pole positions in F1, but no wins.
Right. Okay.
Number 8. You don't have to give a guess now.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've got a name in my head.
Number 8. I won the World Sports Car Championship for Jaguar in 1991.
Oh wait, wasn't that Martin Brundle?
Again, I think Lee would know how to say that.
I have
I think he might
friends
have been
called
trolling
Martin.
us.
Even if we forget Brundle, I have friends called Martin. It would get awkward if I couldn't read that.
Okay, that's changed it, because it's only a couple of drivers I can think of. 82 debut.
No, Martin Brundle didn't make his debut until 80.
No, I was thinking of.
Or 85, so not Brundle. And not my guess is wrong.
Okay. Well, Jaguar and 82. The only 2 people I connect that with would be the Tolman drivers, which would be either Derek Warwick or I think he was in the Jaguar team, Teo Farby.
Oh,
okay.
Oh, yeah, okay.
But I think Warwick debuted in 81 in F1.
So we've got another 2 clues before.
Number 9. I was last active in Formula One at the Indy 500 until a certain Spaniard, and then the clue's gone. I'm gonna say took me out, but it doesn't seem finished.
What? Active in Formula One and the Indy 500? That's not been part of the thing since the 60s.
Right, so the race at the Indy 500 until a certain Spaniard is what this says.
All right, no, Derek.
Oh wait, hang on. The first Formula One driver to be in the Indy 500 until a certain Spaniard.
Yes.
Right.
I see. So someone who was actively involved in F1 and happened to compete in Indy 500 in that season.
It doesn't help me.
No, it doesn't. But
No, but at least we understood the question, even though we don't know the answer.
Number 10. I'm Italian.
So it's Teo Fabi then.
Yeah, is there a Spaffer?
There is. I drove for Benetton in 1986 and 1987.
Yeah, it's Teo Fabi then, isn't it? I don't know
it is.
positions. Yeah.
I am Teo Fabi.
That goes to Scarbs.
Yes,
Yay.
definitely. Well done, Scabs. Thank you for that.
My memory of the Tolman team. Yeah.
Oh, that was a good one. Thank you for that, Santeri. You always keep us on our toes. And keep sending them in with preferably as difficult a name as possible, so that Lee has to struggle, especially during lockdown when he usually does a bottle of wine during the course of a show.
I will say that I did get it right. I worked out my own little head, didn't I?
How do you go about sending in a total shunt?
You can send me a PM on Twitter at a total shunt, or you can send me a PM on Instagram at a total shunt. I'm reminding people now, because we've had such a long gap between shows and actually doing them. If you've already sent me one, just give a little bump, like remind me about it, and it'll be further up the list.
And you can also send reserve ones in for just in case to threelegs4wheels@gmail.com, and you can use that as the standard get in touch email for the show as well. You can get us on all the other socials: Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, all at 3legs4wheels, and individually we all are
At Sean Cowper.
At Flood21.
at Pablo100, and Craig
At a total shunt.
And at Scarbs Tech.
Right, if you want to help the show, and at the moment while we're in lockdown for the next 3 weeks or so, you can subscribe to Patreon at patreon.com/3legs4wheels. You'll get the show earlier than everyone else, and it will also keep us in things like mic cables and software licenses and things like that. Because and probably a new SD card if the cat's just demolished the last one.
I think I managed to fight it away from her, but she was very keen.
And once we get back to normal, we'll probably start doing the Patreon shows again at some point, so you'll get an extra non-F1 show from the lot of us. I think that's about it for tonight, isn't it? Really?
Yes.
I think so. Yeah.
Just want to say thank you very much to Craig for coming on. Love the season previews that you do, and hopefully we'll be joined by you again at some point later on in the season, and we can see if any of these upgrades have happened.
No, absolutely. Let's have a catch-up mid-season. And thank you very much. It's always fun. And, you always put me in the corner with the questions. So thank you very much.
Nice one. That's great. Right, we'll be back next week, and we'll have virtual statman Sean Kelly on with us, all being well. So it's going to be if you've got Who's a Total Shunt to send in, make it really difficult for them. So we'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.